Let's talk about Canada. A country so polite even their geese seem to apologize when they honk at you. Known for its breathtaking landscapes, friendly people, and a reputation for being the world's most courteous nation, Canada is often seen as America's easygoing neighbor to the north. But beneath that calm, maple syrup sweet exterior, things can get heated, especially when it comes to business with the United States. Take their national sport, for example, ice hockey. It's fast, it's fierce, and yes, it's probably the only sport where you'll see players say sorry after a bone-crunching check. Canadians are famous for their politeness, but don't let that fool you. When it comes to defending their own, they can be as tough as they come. In March 2025, President Trump took aim at Canada's dairy industry, threatening a jaw-dropping 250% tariff on Canadian dairy products. He claimed with his signature bravado that Canada's been ripping us off for years. The message was loud and clear. The gloves were off, and the trade war was on. This wasn't just a throwaway comment at a rally, it was a full-blown declaration of economic warfare, and it sent shockwaves through financial markets already jittery from global uncertainty. Investors scrambled, economists sounded alarms, and the news cycle went into overdrive, dissecting every word and predicting dire consequences for both countries. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau didn't mince words, calling the threat very dumb, which in Canadian political speak is about as close as you get to a declaration of battle. The usually diplomatic Trudeau made it clear, Canada wasn't going to back down without a fight. Suddenly, two of the world's friendliest neighbors were squabbling like siblings over the last cookie in the jar. What started as a trade dispute quickly turned into a test of national pride, with both sides digging in their heels and ordinary people caught in the crossfire. At the heart of the matter, dairy tariffs. It's a complex, decades-old fight, wrapped up in layers of regulations, quotas, and political theater. For years, both countries have sparred over milk, cheese, and butter, each accusing the other of unfair practices while protecting their own farmers. But behind all the tough talk and headline-grabbing threats, there are real people whose livelihoods hang in the balance. Dairy farmers on both sides of the border worry about their future, families wonder if prices will rise, and workers in processing plants brace for uncertainty. So is Canada really a dairy pirate plundering American markets with cheap milk? Or is the truth a lot more complicated, buried under years of trade deals, political posturing, and economic realities that don't fit neatly into a soundbite? Grab a glass of milk, because to understand this story we'll need to pore over the facts, skim the headlines, and maybe even churn up a little controversy. Let's dive in. The US and Canada share one of the world's largest trading relationships, exchanging billions of dollars in goods every year. From cars to lumber, oil to electronics, the border hums with activity. But among all these products, there's one that's especially controversial: dairy. The story of milk, cheese, and butter crossing the border is far more complicated and contentious than you might think. Dairy isn't just a staple in our diets, it's a big messy part of the US-Canada trade puzzle. Both countries have proud dairy industries, and both want to protect their farmers. But that's where things get tricky. In 2024, the US exported over $1.1 billion in dairy products to Canada. That's a 55% jump since the USMCA trade deal replaced NAFTA in 2020. The deal was supposed to open up the Canadian market to more American dairy, and by the numbers it's working, at least on the surface. So, when you hear claims that Canada is ripping us off, remember, they're actually buying more of our milk than ever before. American brands are showing up on Canadian shelves and business is booming for some exporters. But behind the scenes, both countries fiercely protect their own farmers. They use tariffs, taxes on imports, to make foreign dairy more expensive, giving local producers an edge. This has led to protests, political fights, and a lot of finger-pointing. You might have heard about Canada's so-called 250% tariff on US dairy. It sounds outrageous, but the truth is more complicated. That number gets thrown around a lot, especially in political debates, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Here's the catch. That huge tariff only kicks in after a certain quota is filled. Up to a set limit, US dairy can enter Canada at a much lower tariff, or even duty-free. But once that quota is used up, the price to get in skyrockets. Imagine it like an exclusive club. The first guests, those early shipments, get in for free or at a discount. But after the club fills up, the bouncer at the door starts charging a fortune for anyone else who wants in. If you're late to the party, you'll pay a steep price. That's how Canada's dairy import system works, and it's called a tariff rate quota, or TRQ. The TRQ system is at the heart of the US-Canada dairy dispute. It's not just about whether Canada has high tariffs. They do, after the quota. The real question is, how much US dairy gets in before those tariffs matter, and who decides which American companies get access to that valuable quota? Canadian officials argue that their system protects family farms and rural communities. US officials say it's unfair and blocks competition. Both sides have taken their fight to trade courts and the negotiating table, each accusing the other of breaking the rules. The real drama isn't just about the size of the tariffs, but about the rules for who gets to use the quota. If you're a US dairy exporter, getting a slice of that quota can mean the difference between profit and loss. That's why the real fight is over who controls access to the quota, and how those rules are written and enforced. It's a battle of paperwork, politics, and powerful lobbies on both sides of the border. So why does all this matter? Because the outcome shapes what ends up on your table, how much you pay for it, and the future of thousands of farmers. The story of cross-border dairy is about more than milk. It's about power, policy, and the people behind every glass and slice. Let's break down the world of cheese trade between the US and Canada, and why it's a lot more complicated than just shipping cheddar across the border. Here's TRQ in plain English. Canada allows a specific, limited amount of US dairy products, like cheese, milk, and butter, to enter the country each year without any extra taxes. This is called a tariff rate quota, or TRQ for short. Think of it as a VIP pass for a set number of cheese wheels. Once that quota is filled though, things change dramatically. After that limit is reached, Canada slams the door shut with a massive 250% tariff on any extra US dairy. That's right, if you try to send more cheese than the quota allows, it suddenly becomes 3 times as expensive, making it nearly impossible for American cheese to compete in Canadian stores. But here's the twist. In 2024, the US didn't even come close to maxing out that tariff-free quota. In fact, less than a third of the allowed amount actually made it across the border. So, while the 250% tariff sounds scary, for most American dairy exporters, it's more of a looming threat than a real obstacle. The reality is the big bad tariff is mostly theoretical. It's like a guard dog that barks a lot but rarely bites, because most US cheese never even gets close to the limit where the tariff would kick in. So what's the real issue? The heart of the complaint is that Canada gives out most of the import licenses, the golden tickets that let you bring in US cheese, almost exclusively to its own dairy processors. These are the same companies that make Canadian cheese and have a vested interest in keeping out the competition. It's a bit like letting the fox not only guard the henhouse, but also decide which hens get to come and go. In this case, the hens are American cheese imports, and the foxes are Canadian dairy companies who'd rather keep the market to themselves. These Canadian companies are the gatekeepers. They get to decide how much US cheese actually makes it onto Canadian shelves. And, let's be honest, they have every incentive to keep those numbers as low as possible to protect their own products and profits. That's why US dairy groups are so frustrated. They argue that this system blocks real competition and keeps American farmers from having a fair shot at selling their cheese in Canada. It's not just about tariffs, it's about access and fairness. So the real fight isn't over the scary-sounding tariff. It's about who gets to decide what cheese ends up in Canadian grocery stores, and who gets to profit from it. It's a battle over market control, not just taxes. At the end of the day, the system is designed to protect Canadian dairy interests and keep their industry strong, not to open the market to foreign competition. That's the way the rules are written, and that's how they're enforced. And that, more than any tariff, is the real sticking point in the US-Canada cheese trade debate. The real issue is Canada's supply management system, a fortress of quotas, price controls, and import restrictions. It keeps Canadian dairy stable but locks out US competition. Even with tariff-free access on paper, US exporters can't get their products on Canadian shelves if Canadian companies control the gate. The US wants its own exporters to get quota access, bypassing Canadian middlemen. Canada fiercely defends its system, seeing it as vital for family farms and price stability. Both sides see the other as undermining their way of life. That's why this fight never ends. Didn't the USMCA trade deal fix this? Not really. The deal expanded US access to Canada's dairy market, but Canada kept giving import licenses to its own processors. The US challenged this, won the first dispute, lost the second. Canada tweaked its rules, but the US says it's just window dressing. Now, with legal options exhausted, Trump is back to tariff threats. The USMCA was supposed to open the market, but the pipeline is still tightly controlled. The 250% tariff threat is a blunt tool to force Canada back to the table. It's a messy end to a deal that was meant to settle things. The core problem? The system, not the tariff. And so, the cycle continues. The fight isn't just about dairy. Trump also threatened tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber. The US relies on Canada for about 30% of its lumber, already taxed at 14.5%. The dispute? US says Canadian lumber is subsidized. Canada disagrees. New tariffs would hit American homebuilders and buyers hard, driving up costs during a housing crisis. US sawmills can't fill the gap if Canadian wood gets too expensive. So while dairy is about market access, lumber is about affordability at home. Raising tariffs now is like pouring gas on a fire. Bad timing for American families. These trade fights aren't just politics, they hit wallets and homes. The stakes are real for everyone. Let's clear up some wild rumors. No, Mexico isn't dumping US milk or rejecting our dairy, they're actually our biggest customer. There's no secret plot or new billion-dollar Canadian dairy deal with Europe or New Zealand. These myths distract from the real US-Canada dispute. The fight is about conflicting systems, not global conspiracies. Facts matter if we want real solutions. Let's stick to them. These trade battles aren't abstract, they hit real people. US dairy farmers feel shut out of a promised market, squeezed by rules they can't control. Builders and homebuyers face higher costs and uncertainty from lumber tariffs. Even the threat of tariffs can spike prices and stall projects. For consumers, trade wars mean higher prices and fewer choices. Retaliation from Canada could hurt other US industries too. The fallout isn't just economic, it strains relationships with our closest allies. The cost is more than dollars, it's trust and stability. Everyone pays the price. Here's the bottom line. Trump's tariff threats target Canada's dairy and lumber, but the 250% dairy tariff is mostly a red herring. The real fight is over Canada's supply management and quota allocation, which keeps US products off shelves. The USMCA didn't solve it. Legal battles ended in a stalemate. Lumber tariffs risk making homes even less affordable for Americans. Ignore the rumors, Mexico isn't the enemy, and Canada hasn't replaced us. What's at stake? Fair access for farmers, affordable homes for families, and stable trade with our biggest partner. This isn't just about milk and wood, it's about how we handle complex problems in a noisy political world. A trade war would hurt everyone. Real solutions require more than threats, they need real compromise.